You're listening to Latinx Therapy. The information shared in this podcast is not a substitute for seeking help from a licensed mental health professional and is not a substitute for psychological diagnoses or treatment. I'm your host, Adriana Alejandra Alejandre, licensed marriage and family therapist. All right, we are back with another episode, and I'm really excited to have Andrea Vargas on the show with us. Andrea Vargas is a licensed mental health counselor. She's a registered play therapist and supervisor, but also she's trained in EMDR. And not only that, Andrea is certified as a first play practitioner. So we really have an amazing guest with us that's going to talk about play therapy. I want to share a little bit more about her. Andrea is also the South Chapter Chair for the Florida Association for Play Therapy, and she has specialized in child and adolescent counseling since 2006. Her practice is located in Weston, Florida, where she serves children of all ages, teens and their families, as well as college students. Andrea is passionate about helping parents and kids strengthen their relationships through playful therapeutic interventions. Andrea was born in Colombia and immigrated to the United States with her family when she was a toddler. Growing up, she remembers that therapy, like in most Latin families, was believed to be for quote-unquote people with problems, crazy people. So thank you, Andrea, for coming on after talking about this for so long. Welcome to Latinx Therapy.
Hi, yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. We're going to talk about play therapy, and I know some of the listeners may be hearing this modality for the first time. So let's go ahead and get started with just explaining what is play therapy.
Okay, so play therapy is what you would kind of translate regular talk therapy to the developmental age of a child, right? So when we picture adults going to therapy, they normally come in, they already have an idea more or less of what they're going to work on, what they're going to talk about, and they sit on the couch and then the dialogue starts, right? But with kids, they don't necessarily come up with the idea of wanting to go to a therapist. So their parents usually bring them in. Talking to kids, like most of you know, if you guys are parents, it's not the same. You know, some kids don't have the words, and even if they do, they'll more than likely say things like, I don't know, or they just look at you like they're really confused. So with play, you meet them where they are developmentally. So kids play and they process their feelings, and they even process all the changes that are happening around them, or maybe negative events that have occurred in their family or in their life. And so a play therapist is a therapist trained specifically to enter the child world and pick up themes that the child might be playing out to get a better understanding of how this child is feeling, what they're struggling with, and then working closely with the parents to help their parents understand them, and then giving parents tools to make certain adjustments, and also the child helping them understand better ways to communicate or better ways to manage and cope with their feelings.
Okay. And so play therapy involves the children, but it sounds like it involves the parents as well.
Yes, yes. I mean, if you think about it, when a therapist meets with a child, they might meet with them once a week, but that's not enough time to really change or enough. I mean, it's almost impossible really to change somebody, a child, when you're not thinking about the whole family or even school. So if the child is having a problem at school, just working with the child limits you to how much change can be really made. So if you work closely with the school, you work closely with the parents, and if maybe they have grandparents, for example. So part of working with a child is understanding that they have a lot of adults involved in their life. And if all the adults get on the same page and work together, that child is going to be way more successful.
Okay. What about children that have caregivers or are in the foster care system? Are they eligible to receive play therapy? Like, would that be a modality for them as well if they don't have a consistent caregiver?
Yes. I mean, when we think about foster kids, they definitely need a safe space to process all of those feelings that they're feeling because of their foster care placement. So it's a little tricky because, like you said, they don't have consistent caregivers. But, if they are in a foster home, you can work at least with the foster parent and then whatever school they might be going to. So maybe it's not as consistent because they might change the foster home, or maybe they are still working on reunification with their parent, with their biological parent. You can always include, depending on the case, right? Whoever is currently taking care of the child, and if they still have contact with the biological parent, involving them as well.
Okay, that makes sense. What are the ages that play therapy is best for?
So people say, like play therapists say, that their play therapy can work with anybody from 3 to 103, right? But it's been studied, and studies have found that it's most effective with kids between the ages of 3 and 12.
So it is possible. And what about the children with special needs? Is play therapy also something that they can do?
Yes, there are, just like in adult therapy, there's different specializations. So there are different type of training that maybe somebody would take in order to work with children on the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually called off play. There's other stuff like floor time. So there's, underneath play therapy, there's different branches. So as long as you as a therapist understand the child's special need and you are trained in working with that special need population, then you can definitely use play therapy.
What are some of those branches that you're mentioning? I didn't ever think about that, you know, and many of you listening, if, you follow me, you know that I specialize only in adults. So this is really interesting and a new territory for me. I did know that floor therapy, PCIT exists, but it sounds like play therapy is an umbrella for different modalities. What are some of those?
So play therapy or play therapists even have different theoretical approaches, right? There's Adlerian play therapy, there's cognitive behavioral play therapy, there's trauma play therapy, there's attachment based play therapy. So anything you can possibly think of, there's been some way of blending it with play therapy or making it a special branch, like you said, for play therapy.
So fascinating. Thank you. What's the training requirement to become a play therapist?
So you can work on becoming a play therapist if you have like a mental health background, but you won't be able to become a registered play therapist until you are licensed. If you're in grad school, you can attend trainings and those will count towards your play therapy certification, but you won't be able to apply. So once you apply, you would need to be a licensed mental health professional. You would need 150 hours of play therapy CEs or like training hours, and you would have to be supervised by a registered play therapist supervisor and have a certain number of clinical hours. So all of that information with the specifics, because I don't want to say anything right now because sometimes it changes. So you would just go to the website, ap4t.org.
Okay, and I'll be sure to link that in the show notes and we'll talk a little bit more about it during the resources. And so, how does play therapy help? How does it help to process with the children? I know that I've heard a lot of parents complain and say that, you know, the therapist just plays game. So, for those that may have had this experience, if we can just talk about how it helped.
Okay. So that's important that you note that, because sometimes understand that play therapy is more than just playing a game. Just like in individual therapy with adults, you are not just talking about what you did on the weekend, right? So that would be kind of the same thing when you just play a game and there's no intention behind it. There's no art to it, right? So you can definitely play a game, but then what is the point of the game? Is the point of the game to observe the child and understand whether or not they are okay with losing? How do they handle frustration? Or not triggering them, but maybe practicing managing frustration when you're losing or waiting your turn. So that would be more like cognitive behavioral type of, you can use a game with a family and then observe them and maybe analyze how their attachment is or how the parent reacts to the child, or maybe playing a game that the family just made up. So it's important to understand that yes, there's playing, but there's always a reason for it. And the therapist is tracking or following the child's lead, looking out for like themes. Is there always a common theme of power struggle in the game? Or are they all scattered? If they're scattered and then they're playing a game and they can't focus or they can't really organize themselves, then, all of that is about learning what is really going on with that child. So, yes, you're playing, but you're not just playing.
So there's a therapeutic approach to it, while the therapist is also working on observing, noticing, and really holding space for the child during the play. And then this feedback, the observations, how does the therapist then make it therapeutic for the child and or the family?
The way that it's therapeutic is because part of being a therapist is meeting the client where they are. Part of the therapeutic relationship is this child, like you said, feels safe with you to play out these things and trust you with all that information that they're sharing, because you can learn a lot about what the child is playing. You can understand how they're feeling and you can understand what they're struggling with. And so then you take that information, and depending on where you are in treatment, you either just follow it and see where it takes you, or you might reflect and say, "Oh, I noticed that," and you never include the client in the theme. You just say, "I noticed that the dinosaur seems really angry when this happens," and then sometimes the kids, will say, "Yeah, because that one is so much bigger and he's always picking on him," and you know that they're talking about them on themselves. But it's so much easier to talk about the dinosaur or the tiger than it is about themselves. So you use that information to help the parents understand. So maybe they've been acting out, but it's acting out because maybe something's happening at school, or maybe they have a neighbor that's been picking on them, but they haven't really said anything because they don't know how to express it. And then with the child, then you say, "Oh, I wonder if the little dinosaur could maybe call a bigger dinosaur and get them, get some help." And then the child might be surprised, or maybe never thought about that. Or maybe you say, "No, because the dinosaurs don't ever listen," or something like that. And then you can it's all about you as the adult entering their world, processing through whatever it is that they're showing you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And yes, it takes a lot of creativity, it sounds like, and imagination work. So this specialty is really unique for the therapist that can do that, have that, maintain that. And I say that because that isn't my territory. I just can't get myself to enter worlds like that. But I definitely appreciate therapists like yourself that can hold space for little ones. On this topic, before we go into how you're adapting and other play therapists are adapting their work for online work during COVID, just want the listeners to hear a little bit about the confidentiality piece with children. And it does vary from state to state in terms of the ages that can have confidentiality, unfortunately. But if you can just talk to us a little bit about that confidentiality piece, like what stays in the therapy space and what is shared with parents.
Well, like you said, it does vary by state, and it also the style, the way that you go about it might vary by therapist. Like I said, I like to involve a lot of parents in the work. I know that there's different therapists that maybe are very child centered, which means that they focus mostly on the child, and the parents are not often in the room with the child and the therapist. But my personal approach is I always tell everybody in the beginning that my job is to make sure everyone is safe. So we talk about what that is. What's safe? Well, safe is nobody's hurting you, you're not hurting yourself, and you're not going to hurt anyone, right? And that's really good also in the playroom, because some kids get really excited or they have a lot of aggression and they might take of the toys and start like throwing them, or might be climbing things. And then you always remind them one of the rules is that you have to be safe, or I'm helping you be safe. I always explain to the parents the mandated reporter laws about child abuse. And then with parents, I always, because I'm a mom myself, and me personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable taking my child to a therapist and not knowing what's going on. I don't want to know the details, but I do want to know, what they're doing. Like, what are they working on? So I won't go into details, but more like, well, we talked about things that maybe are bothering him at school. that would be something. And then maybe we can contact the teacher because it seems like this child might need something different in school. So we're working and we're communicating, but I'm not saying, well, he took this specific toy and we played this specific game. So it's more like a very general summary. And I always like to bring the parents in because at the end of the day, the kids are going home with the parents. And I like watching the parents and the child interact and learn different ways to communicate via the play. But that's just my personal approach.
Yeah, there are different approaches. This does vary from therapist to therapist, but Andrea mentioned the mandated laws, and generally, typically, again, they do vary from state to state. So please look into what it is in your state for mental health professionals. But the mandated laws are generally that what is not confidential is if a client tells us, a therapist, that they want to hurt themselves in the form of suicide, they have intentions, or they want to hurt someone else, cause bodily harm. Also, if they know or suspect that someone is abusing a child, whether that's physically or sexually, that is also reportable. And among children, there's also adults that are disabled and elderly adults that are also protected. So for disabled folks and the elderly, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and financial abuse can also be reportable. Again, this varies from state to state. I'm in California, and those are my laws here.
Yes, and sometimes in some states also domestic violence is considered child abuse because of the psychological trauma that occurs in children who have experienced or witnessed domestic violence.
Yeah, I wish that was more so the case where they are protected from that. Here, from my understanding, it is only if the children are hurt during the incident or if there is severe, intense emotional abuse that happens to the child. But typically, those are gray areas. Let's merge back into play therapy. I want to talk a little bit about, because we are experiencing COVID right now, how is your work, play therapy, being modified for online therapy?
With a lot of extra creativity, for sure. So there are so many things virtually that you can do. Something I didn't mention is another modality of play therapy that therapists use. It's a sand tray, and there's actually a virtual sand tray. So the child can pick out the miniatures, which are like the little objects that normally in the playroom the children would grab from the shelf and put it in the sand. So there's a couple of apps, there's websites online where the child can pick out the miniatures, the little toys or whatever that you can put inside the sand tray, and they create their own world. And then, the therapist might give a directive or might not. And that can be done online. So that's been really fun. Puppets, we can still use puppets. I mean, kids watch hours of YouTube, right? There are adults entertaining them. So we've turned into sort of like YouTubers in a way, with bringing out toys, and then we have the funny voices and we're wearing masks and just trying to engage them. Something we're doing also is creating virtual playrooms. And you can do this through like PowerPoint or something like, or Google Docs or something like that. And then you create a playroom, and then it's almost simulating how a child walks into an actual playroom and picks what they want to do. So in the playroom, you might set it up in what your playroom looks like. And then instead of the child picking up the object, they click on the link. So if you have a sand tray in your virtual playroom, child can click on the virtual sand tray, and then the virtual sand tray app or the website comes up, and you can do that. I mean, there are therapists that are not only creative, but they're also very technologically savvy. So they've made like doll houses, and then you can put furniture in there. I mean, it's been a wild ride. I'm so impressed with my colleagues because they really have made this really, really fun and interesting.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And are these resources easily accessible?
There are some of the therapists are sharing, like they are making them themselves, and then they'll share the link, or very low fee. There's others that are super expensive because of the fact that they are maybe a lot fancier. Also, if you don't have that and you need more hands-on, I know that myself and other therapists will use family members and have the parents play with the child. what I do is I send them a list of things that they probably have at home already. And then I guide the family virtually in the activity. And it's a lot of fun. And the kids almost forget that I'm there. And they are having so much fun with their parents. And these are really simple things that they can do. And that's so therapeutic because in our world, as we know, we're super busy. So the fact that we now have more access to parents and their kids in the same room, we can take advantage of that. Whereas before COVID, when everybody was running around with schedules, sometimes mom could make it, sometimes dad, maybe the sibling was in soccer practice, but now everybody's home. So it's like family therapy galore for sure.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a great way to heal the whole system, the family system. So, Andrea, I just want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing all of this knowledge with us. Are there any resources that you'd like to share about play therapy for families to learn a little bit more, or for therapists to learn a little bit more about how to become a play therapist?
Okay, so for families, you can always go to the website. There's a link on there that'll have information for parents. It's again www.a for like the number 4 pt.org. And for therapists that want to pursue becoming a registered play therapist or finding out more about play therapy, that same website has the directory of registered play therapists, registered play therapist supervisors, and again, all the requirements to become a play therapist. They also post trainings on there. You can also reach out to your local chapter. Every state has one. There are some really cool videos on YouTube. I know Maylene Vasquez is so generous with her time, and she posts these interventions free on YouTube. There's Facebook group for play therapists and specifically for teleplay therapists. We're all trying to help each other out with like different activities. They're creating board games online. I mean, there's a big need for play therapy, and I'm hoping that spreading the word about it will get kids quality treatment that they deserve.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you?
You can find me on my website, Andrea Vargas, lmhc.com. Instagram, same handle. Facebook, same thing. I'm creative, but for some reason I got stuck with my name and I just went with my name.
That's excellent. That's very easy. And I'll be sure to link them again in the show notes. Thank you so much, Andrea. And stay tuned to hear this episode in Spanish as well.
Thank you.